Hello and good evening, YouTube. This is Kamikaze Games. I'm watching The Loud House because I'm a fucking child. And I'm gonna do a nice little countdown video. Yes, I am fully aware of the fact that I'm stealing from the needle drop, and I don't give a shit. Today we're gonna rank every single Bee Gees album. There are so damn many of them, 20 to be exact. And by 20, I mean we're not going to count the soundtracks that they did. We're not going to count any compilations. We're not going to count any live albums. Just the main studio releases. So let's get this show on the road. We'll start at the bottom and work our way up like most countdown lists do. First album on the list, their worst album, is going to be Cucumber Castle. Now, I am not that much of a fan of the Bee Gees pre-disco work, and there are very good songs off of those albums, but as a whole, the albums aren't that great. As for Cucumber Castle, the biggest problem here is that, unlike in their older albums, specifically Idea and Odessa, they don't emphasize the deep orchestral nature that they had really in the early years. Like, it came back too. The Bee Gees became a bit of an orchestra over the course of all the times that they existed, and Cucumber Castle has the least emphasis on all they have to fall back on are the harmonics in this album, which is not the best, especially in this album. They're younger voices. They're kind of going through a transition in this album, but yeah. If I had to suggest one song for you to listen to off of the album, I would pick Bury Me by the River. That's about the only thing that's worth listening to on the entire album. Moving on. Next is To Whom It May Concern, coming in at 19. It suffers from the same problems that Cucumber Castle does. It's very empty. The feeling's empty. There isn't much instrumentation there. All that you can fall back on it are the harmonics. Beyond that, it's basically the same problem as Cucumber Castle. The only difference here is that it was made a bit later and the production's a bit better. If I had to suggest a song, I would pick Never Been Alone, but there's not much good on either of these two albums. After this one, we'll get into some better stuff. Speaking of better stuff, Horizontal comes in at 18. That's their second album. The reason this comes in better than the last two albums, it is older, yes, but it does have a few good songs on it. The last two albums, I really couldn't give you a good song off of there. I don't think anything is that good off of Cucumber Castle or To Whom It May Concern, but in Horizontal, Massachusetts, one of their most known songs, but also The Sun Will Shine, that's a good song as well. This one has a bit more of that orchestration like I was talking about before. You'll see a lot more of it in future albums. Next in line we have Trafalgar. This album, once again, suffers from the same problems that the first two albums I discussed did, but Trafalgar actually has a better set of songs in it. There are a few good songs in here. The problem is that it has one of my most hated Bee Gees songs, not albums. It's How Can You Mend a Broken Heart. I despise that song, but that's just me. As for the rest of the album, the title track and When I Do are pretty good songs. But basically, we're just going through the garbage right now. You're gonna wanna skip ahead a little bit if you're not gonna want to find garbage. Coming in at number 16 is their 1991 album, High Civilization, and this album suffers from the biggest problems, and that's the feeling of emptiness. The songs feel so bare bones, like they're doing the bare minimum to put out this album. It doesn't feel. There's no love. There's no depth. There's very little instrumentation, like I said before. The orchestration is non-existent. The only high spot is the title track, High Civilization. Ghost Train and Human Sacrifice are pretty decent, but the rest of the song are just a product of their time, which is really sad considering their next album. Number 15 is Bee Gees' their first studio release. It has the charm of being their first album, and that really adds to it. You can tell that they're just trying to get their feet wet in this album. So they try to experiment a little bit more, especially with the instrumentation and the orchestral elements that I love to hear in there are a couple albums that are coming up here. The songs that I would suggest are 1 Minute Woman and To Love Somebody. To Love Somebody is actually my second most hated Bee Gees song, coming in a close second to How Can You Mend This Broken Heart. But yeah, the rest of the album is pretty solid. Nothing great, but you can listen through the whole thing except for To Love Somebody and not get pissed off. Next up is number 14, and that is One from 1989. Now, this may get a little controversial as we get into this middle section, because I put a lot of their later work in the middle section and barely any of their older work in this section. So, One has the big problem that High Civilization had, which is not that odd considering the fact that High Civilization came out immediately after One, and they basically have both. They both have the same problems to them. There's no depth to the songs. The orchestration is non-existent. All you can fall back on are the harmonization elements, and there's definitely a few good songs in here, the title track being one of them, but even the title track, one of their better songs on this album, suffers from the same problem that all the other songs do, and that's the lack of depth. There's really only two instruments in the whole thing, just like the bass and that little kind of like strumming of the guitar thing. I don't know if that's guitar or if that's electric, but I don't know. The other song on this album that I actually would 100% recommend, this is one of the songs that I actually like most from the Bee Gees, and that's Tears. And the reason I like it so much is because that orchestral instrumentation is there. There is a lot of depth in that song. And the reason why Tears doesn't rank really high in like my list of, if I were to go like a list of top 15 favorite singles from the Bee Gees, this wasn't a single, I don't think, but you get the fucking idea what I'm trying to say. Tears would rank pretty low. I do really like it, but the problem that it has is that the lyrics are really repetitive. It's basically one of their least creative in the lyrical side, but the instrumentation is good enough for it to be one of the songs that I like the most. Number 13 is going to be Still Waters, and like One and High Civilization, Still Waters is better than both of those albums, but it still suffers from that lack of instrumentation. The songs are really shallow. Lyrically, they aren't that great. The songs that I would recommend off of this one are going to be the title track and Alone. Now, as compared to the last album where Tears was one of my favorite songs by the Bee Gees, but it ranked pretty low, Alone might actually be one of my top 5 favorite Bee Gees songs ever. Alone is exactly what I like to hear from the Bee Gees. Their instrumentation is perfect. It's catchy as all hell. Their harmonization is brilliant. It's a great song all around. The problem is that the rest of the album really falls flat on its face after after the opener Alone. The title track's decent, but there's not much else on this album to go off of. Next, on number 12, is 2 Years On. Ironically, coming out more than 3 years after the Bee Gees' first album. 2 Years On is one of those old pre-disco albums that I actually do enjoy listening to. It has that instrumentation. It has that experimentation. And the harmonization that's there is good. For the songs that I'd recommend would be Man for All Seasons, Back Home, and Lonely Days. Lonely Days is one of their most known songs, but there's a reason for that. It's a really good one. It's kind of a response, kind of in the same manner that Idea was a bit of a response to Rubber Soul, maybe. Lonely Days is a bit of a response to Magical Mystery Tour, I'd say. Number 11 is going to be ESP. ESP is a nice atmospheric album. There is good orchestration in it. The problem is that it's really a product of its time. It's so dated. It's so dated. You can not know anything about the Bee Gees. Turn on this album and you'll know instantly, oh, that's from the mid-'80s. It's heavy electronic, and I do like electronic music occasionally, but that's not really what I go for the Bee Gees for. But I do rank it over most of those other albums because there are good songs to be heard. The title track and Giving Up the Ghost are a good example of those two songs that are good off this album. As a whole, it doesn't really drag out. The album doesn't really drag out. Now we'll get into the top 10. Number 10 is Life in a Tin Can. Now, this may surprise people because this is going right off of one of their longest albums, or actually getting to one of their shorter albums. And it's more of an EP of things, actually, to be honest. Life in a Tin Can is very short, but it's punctual, I guess. They don't do too much, they do just enough. And the instrumentation orchestration in this album is on point. This is one of their best orchestral albums. The instrumentation in this album is phenomenal. I would listen to this any day before any of the albums that I've listed so far. I would listen to Life in a Tin Can in full before I listen to any other album in full that we've done so far. Like, this is a very solid album. South Dakota Morning, Living in Chicago, and My Life Has Been a Song are the three that I'd recommend off of this album, but the whole thing is very good. It helps to listen to it through in order, but listen to any of the three songs would be good choices. Number 9 is Odessa, and this might be one of their best albums before the disco era. Odessa is everything that I wanted to hear from the Bee Gees in the pre-disco days. It has everything I want. Great orchestration, the instrumentation is lovely. Their harmonization, when it's used, is used properly. Basically, it's everything good about Idea except a year later, okay? That's what I'm trying to say. The title track, You'll Never See My Face Again, Black Diamond, and Seven Seas Symphony. Seven Seas Symphony especially, you'll think that you're listening to, like, I don't know, you'll be thinking you're listening to Beethoven, I swear. Number 8 is Living Eyes. It's not as good as a lot of the albums that I've done so far, but there's a few good songs in here that will actually make me rank the album as a whole higher. Those are the title track, Living Eyes, Don't Fall in Love with Me, and He's a Liar. He's a Liar is one of my favorite Bee Gees songs that would probably be ranking in my top 10 favorite Bee Gees songs ever. Once again, this is their first album after Spirits, and that was actually their first album that really wasn't a commercial success since hitting the disco scene. And it still has some of those disco elements from Spirits, but it's toned back a bit, and you can really tell that they're kind of running on steam at this point, but they still managed to put out a few good songs in there. That's why I rank this as high as I did. Number 7 is Idea. It doesn't get any better than this, folks. The Idea is the Bee Gees pre-disco at their best. Every song is killer. The instrumentation is phenomenal. It's just, you could tell they went all out on this album. My recommendations are the title track, In His Summer Years, Message, and I Started a Joke. Two of them being obvious, well-known songs by the Bee Gees, but the whole album's great. Just listen to it. Okay, now we're getting into my favorite albums. All 6 of these final albums. Listen to them. They're just that good. So let's get going here. Number 6 is This Is Where I Came In. This was actually my first Bee Gees album, and it was released on my 3rd birthday. So that is pretty fucking nuts if you ask me. This album starts out with the title track, and when you first listen to it, it does start to feel really hollow at the start, and that can be a little bit iffy, but as the album goes on, the instrumentation becomes a lot more in-depth. There's still harmonization in places. Like, this was their final album before Maurice died, and then basically the band fell apart, obviously. But this is the last that you'll ever hear the Bee Gees, but it's still very strong. You really can't tell that they had any sort of premonition, any sort of feeling that they were going to be ending their music careers anytime soon. They still go strong. There's a few weak songs in here, but as a whole, it's a very solid piece. If you like stuff like Odessa, there's a few songs on the B-side that are pretty similar to Odessa, such as Technicolor Dreams. I don't really like it that much, but I'm sure that people that enjoyed the old pre-disco Bee Gees would enjoy that song. The songs that I would recommend, though, are She Keeps On Coming, Sacred Trust, Man in the Middle, and one of my favorite songs, probably in the top 3 Bee Gees ever, Voice in the Wilderness. There is another song that I have to make mention of in this. Deja Vu. If that doesn't sound like a Backstreet Boys song, I don't know what does. I mean, I could see NSYNC putting out Deja Vu. That's how I mean, when I first heard it, I didn't think Deja Vu. I thought, actually, you know what, all things considered, I guess by the definition Deja Vu, I did actually have a feeling of Deja Vu. But I'm not sure if that was what they were going for. I mean, maybe they were. That's the damn song. It's the name of the damn song. Maybe that was what they were thinking for. But when I was thinking Deja Vu, like, this is like Evan and Jaren's Crazy for This Girl. That's like the closest that I can make a parallel to for Deja Vu. It's very interesting. You have to hear it. Coming in at number 5 is Mr. Natural. This was their final, I guess you could call it pre-disco era. But it's got that tone to it. It has a disco era tone to it, and it literally came out in 1974, a year before Main Course did. And it has that feeling, but it's still, you can tell it's a transitional album. But the strange thing about it is that, in a similar fashion to Pitch Shifter's Infotainment, which is basically their transition from industrial metal to drum and bass, that transition where they combine the two is so strong. The way that they combine their pre-disco to their Main Course disco in Mr. Natural is brilliant. The whole album's great, and you need to listen to it from start to finish to understand. Don't jump around in this album. It flows excellently. Charade, Throw a Penny, and Down the Road. Listen to those 3 in order, and you will understand what I mean. Also, check out the title track. It's a pretty good song. Coming in at number 4 is Main Course, 1975 album. Their big foray into disco. And in a similar fashion to the previous album, Mr. Natural, where they first started flirting with falsetto, they really come on strong with the falsetto in this one. Nights on Broadway is phenomenal. I mean, you could not have picked a better a better opening track. Nights on Broadway is marvelous. One of my top 5 favorite Bee Gees songs. As for the rest of the album, Jive Talk and Winds of Change, Fanny, All This Making Love, Baby As You Turn Away, it's a great album from start to finish. I mean, all the rest of these are all top 5. All these top 5 songs, all these albums, they're all great from start to finish. What makes Main Course better than, I'd say, Mr. Natural is that they have a lot more focus. Since Mr. Natural was more of that transition album, Main Course has a bit more focus on the disco. And while Mr. Natural is great, they did have a few songs that were a little iffy on that album. Main Course doesn't have that. Main Course, it doesn't stutter. It's great from start to finish. The instrumentation is marvelous. The orchestration is even better. And the harmonization in falsetto is unreal. Number 3, Children of the World. For them to come off of Main Course and not even, they don't stumble. I mean, I don't know if Children of the World is any better than Main Course. Honestly, I'd put them together. I'd group them together, not really put one above the other. You Should Be Dancing, You Stepped Into My Life, Love So Right, Can't Keep a Good Man Down, Boogie Child. All of those are great songs off of here. The whole thing is pretty good. The only problem that I have on this album really isn't a bad song, but more so a song that I just laugh at more than anything. And it's titled Lovers. Listen to this song and try not to laugh. I mean, there's trying hard and then there's trying too hard. It goes a little bit above and beyond on that song, I'm gonna be honest. Now for number 2, if you're a Bee Gees fan, you'll know which one's number 1 after I say which one's number 2, but if you're not a Bee Gees fan, and even if you are a Bee Gees fan, you're probably surprised at this point. If you know all the Bee Gees music, you know that there's one album that I've been missing so far. And that is number 2, I have Size Isn't Everything, their 1993 album. I'm pretty certain that not a single song on this album was a number 1 hit. But that being said, like, this album goes hard. You could tell that it's a product of its time. When you turn on the album and the first chords of Paying the Price of Love come on, when those first notes start, you're thinking you're listening to, like, a Run DMC album. Like, that's just what it is. But it works. The thing about Size Isn't Everything is that it works. It's not trying too hard. Like Lovers in the last album, it tries just enough. Somehow, the Bee Gees played the strengths of the R&B scene in the early 90s and made a pop album out of it. And most of the album isn't like that, but so much of it is that you just sit back shocked and you just think, how do they do that? This album is fantastic from start to finish. There is a bit of a slow spot, and I'll get to that in a second. First of all, I need to recommend the first 5 songs in order: Paying the Price of Love, Kiss of Life, How to Fall in Love, Omega Man, and Haunted House. Omega Man is a bit of an acquired taste. In a similar fashion to Lovers, it's a bit try-hard, but, I mean, you can't deny the beat. After Haunted House is where it starts stuttering a little bit. Heart Like Mine is just... They were going so strong after Haunted House. Heart Like Mine just brings the album to just a screeching halt, and it's just really slow. And then it comes back with Anything for You and Blue Island, which are 2 just really bland filler songs. But Above and Beyond is decent, but it doesn't... it's not good enough to be the song that leads into For Whom the Bell Tolls. For Whom the Bell Tolls in full, maybe one of the greatest songs ever written. It's not a Metallica cover. Honestly, it's better than the Metallica song. And I fucking love Fear Factory, Metallica, all them guys. I'm a metalhead to the end. For Whom the Bell Tolls by the Bee Gees is a better song than For Whom the Bell Tolls by Metallica. I like Fade to Black more so than For Whom the Bell Tolls on Ride the Lightning, as it is anyway. After that, it's Fallen Angel, and then after that, it's basically a remix of You Should Be Dancing, which they call Decadence. Yeah, if it weren't for that midsection, Heart Like Mine to Blue Island, I might even put this above the next album. But sizes and everything. It's an album that shouldn't work, but it does, and by God, it's good shit. Obviously, we have to find out what the #1 album by the Bee Gees is. And if you know anything about the Bee Gees, you know what it is. The #1 album by the Bee Gees is Spirits Having Flown. An absolutely marvelous display. It's excellence from start to finish. I recommend the whole damn album. The only song that I wouldn't recommend on this album, what I think you should just skip and just move on from, is Stop, Think Again. Not only is it the longest song on the album, but it's just it has a tonal shift to it, and when there's a tonal shift in an album, it can work humongously, such as Resurrection and Timelessness in Fear Factory Obsolete. The problem with Stop, Think Again is that it's on an album that you just feel high the entire time, and Stop, Think Again is just, in the same fashion that Heart Like Mine just screeches the album to a halt. But as for the rest of it, I mean, it starts off with Tragedy, and that's the kind of strength that the Bee Gees should have played in making a song like Stop, Think Again. Tragedy is not really a love song like their other ones. It is, but it's more of a love-less song. And yet they still managed to put forth 100%. Like, the instrumentation in Tragedy is phenomenal. There's so much depth to it. Like, if you listen carefully in the background of all the song, like, of the entire song Tragedy, like, you just try and count how many instruments there are. And then when they harmonize, like, it's just so good. The whole song is sung in falsetto, basically, but most of the album's sung in falsetto. Like, that's how good this is. Then it moves on to Too Much Heaven, and that is kind of Stop, Think Again done right. Too Much Heaven is. It's not too long. It's not too slow. Stop, Think Again, I'd say, is like 10 beats per second slower than Too Much Heaven. And I think Too Much Heaven is a pretty good length. Could have been a bit quicker, but... And they sing with strength in Too Much Heaven. You really feel like they're singing from the soul. In Stop, Think Again, it kind of sounds like they just woke up and just rolled out of bed and just brought a microphone up to their mouth while they were laying face down on the floor. Too Much Heaven feels like they actually care. Then it goes to Love You Inside Out. Not one of my favorite songs on the album. Probably my all things considered, probably my third most disliked on this album. But it's still a strong song. It still carries the momentum into Reaching Out. Reaching Out, a bit bland, but still has that instrumentation to it, still has that harmonization to it. Like, the best part about the orchestration in this album is that no two songs sound too much alike. You can tell a song's off of Spirits if you listen to it, but you can tell the difference between every song when you listen through the album. Then it moves on to Spirits Having Flown. It's one of the longer songs. I think it's the second longest song on the album, but at the same time, it carries that energy the whole time. And after Spirits is Search Find. Maybe my favorite song on the album. There's so much passion in it. I mean, it's like Tragedy, but not as intense and more groovy. It's Search Find, I feel like could have been maybe placed in Saturday Night Fever somehow, some way. Obviously, Stop Think Again brings us to a screeching halt, but then after that is Living Together. Unfortunately, maybe my second most hated song on the album. It's not great, but it does get you back into the feeling. After Living Together is I'm Satisfied, which is, I think, the same tempo as Too Much Heaven, but it's so tonally different that it feels like a completely different song, and it actually feels more groovy. I would find myself dancing more so in a Search Find manner to I'm Satisfied than I would in a slow dance manner like Too Much Heaven. Maybe the biggest problem with Stop Thinking It is that you can't dance to it. It's like the only one, you can't even slow dance to it. It's too damn long for one thing, and it's too damn slow and there's barely anything in there. There's not even emotion. I fucking hate Stop Think Again. Can you tell? The album ends on Until, which is a very odd way of ending an album. You can really tell the tonal difference that they're going to be going for in future albums, such as the next one, Living Eyes, but more so in further future albums like ESP, which is strange considering the fact that they broke up after Living Eyes and there wasn't going to be an ESP until they got back together, obviously. And even still, I like the song more than Stop Think Again. As a whole, this album is just great. Obviously, because of Stop Think Again, it's not a 10 out of 10 album, but it's a solid 9 out of 10 at worst. Fuck my ass, that was a 32-minute long video, and the camera is laggy as all living shit, of course, because, you know, having a camera that does more than 5 frames per second is so much to ask for. Anyway, thanks for watching this video. I was told to do one for Iron Maiden, so that's what I'll do next if people care about this series. If I make it a series, that is. And yeah, so thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video. And this has been Kamikaze Games reviewing every single VG Studio album. Bye!